The beauty that became a curse. In a quiet village nestled between golden plains and towering baobab trees, a girl was born with a beauty so striking that even the elders whispered about it. Her parents named her Zoe, meaning beautiful, believing she was a gift from the ancestors. But as she grew, the villagers gave her another name, Nyota, which meant star, for she seemed to shine brighter than anyone else. Nyota's beauty was unlike anything the village had ever seen. Her skin glowed like rich mahogany under the sun, her deep-set eyes held the warmth of the earth, and her smile could soften even the hardest hearts. Yet, beyond her looks, Nyota was kind and full of life. She had a rare gift for weaving, creating intricate patterns in cloth that told the stories of their ancestors. She spent hours at the loom, learning the craft from her mother, her fingers moving like a whisper over the threads. However, as she grew older, Nyota realized that her talent and kindness were often overlooked. Men from the village and beyond came to admire her, but none ever spoke of her weaving or her sharp mind. Instead, they spoke only of her face, her grace, and her beauty. Women watched her with envy, and young men competed for her attention. But none truly saw her. Nyota had two older sisters, Kamara and Nia, both beautiful in their own right. When rich men from the city came looking for wives, they were eager to take them away. Their marriages were grand affairs, drums echoed through the village, dancers moved in the moonlight, and promises of wealth and prosperity filled the air. Nyota had watched with wide eyes as her sisters were adorned in gold and carried away in chariots, believing they were heading towards a better life. But the reality was much different. Kamara's husband, despite his wealth, was unfaithful. He spent his nights in the company of other women, leaving Kamara alone in a house that was grand but empty of love. She had been promised an education, but once married, she was expected only to be beautiful, silent, and obedient. Nia, on the other hand, had it even worse. Her husband was cruel. He accused her of things she had never done, controlled her every move, and left bruises on her skin and heart alike. She wanted to leave, but where would she go? She had no skills, no education, and her parents had already received the bride price. She was trapped. Nyota saw their suffering and felt a deep sadness settle within her. She had once dreamed of love, of finding someone who would cherish her for more than just her face. But if even her beautiful, once happy sisters had suffered, what chance did she have? She sat under the old baobab tree one evening, watching the sun set behind the hills, her hands gripping a piece of cloth she had been weaving. The patterns told the stories of their ancestors, of strong women, of warriors, of queens who had shaped history. "I will not be a prisoner of my beauty," she whispered to the wind. Nyota made a promise to herself that night. She would not marry for wealth or status. She would not let her beauty define her. She would carve her own path, make her own way, and find someone who truly saw her, not just her face, but her heart. She would test the world, and see if true love could exist beyond what the eye could see. The mask of plainness. As the years passed, Nyota's beauty only became more radiant. By the time she reached adulthood, her name was known far beyond her village. Suitors arrived from distant lands, wealthy traders, noblemen, and even sons of chiefs, all eager to claim her as their wife. They arrived bearing gifts, gold, fine fabrics, and promises of a life of ease. But Nyota rejected them all. Her mother, Mama Julia, could not understand. "My daughter, do you not see the blessings before you? A rich husband will bring you comfort, security." Her father, Babachidi, frowned. "A woman's beauty fades, but a husband's wealth remains. You must choose wisely, Nyota." But Nyota had already chosen, she chose herself. One evening, tired of her parents' pressure, Nyota decided to visit her sisters in the city. If they saw what a grand life awaited her, maybe they would understand why she hesitated. But what she found broke her heart. Her eldest sister, Kamara, once full of laughter, now sat in a mansion filled with gold but empty of joy. Her husband barely looked at her. Servants moved around the house like shadows, but there was no warmth, no love. Kamara whispered her pain between forced smiles. Nyota, I am nothing more than an ornament to him, she confessed, her voice heavy with regret. He loved my beauty, but he never loved me. When Nyota visited Nia, the bruises on her sister's skin told a story before Nia even spoke. Why don't you leave? Nyota asked, her throat tight with sorrow. Nia shook her head. And go where? A woman without a husband is like a tree without roots. I have no money, no home to return to. Nyota left the city with a storm in her heart. That night, she sat alone under the moon, weaving a simple cloth, her fingers working in the dim candlelight. Her sisters had been admired for their beauty, yet they suffered. If she continued on the same path, how could she expect a different fate? She had to know, was there a man who would love her for her mind, her kindness, her spirit? And so, she devised a plan. From the clay of the riverbank, she crafted a thick paste, mixing it with herbs known to darken and roughen the skin. She cut strips of old fabric, layering them carefully to make a mask, one that would cover her delicate features and make her appear ordinary. The fabric held the scent of earth and time, disguising the glow of her smooth skin. When she looked at her reflection in the water, she gasped. Gone was Nyota, the village beauty. In her place stood a plain, unremarkable woman, one no man would desire at first glance. She tied a scarf around her head and gathered her few belongings. At sunrise, Nyota left the village, not as a beauty sought by all, but as an unknown woman chasing her dream. Her journey had begun. A new life in the city. The city was nothing like the village. The air smelled of spices and smoke, and the streets were filled with merchants shouting their prices, children weaving through crowds, and travelers from faraway lands. Nyota pulled her scarf tighter around her head, feeling the weight of her disguise. She had left behind the life where she was adored for her beauty. Here, she was simply another girl seeking work. After days of searching, she found herself in front of Mama Lila's textile shop, one of the most respected in the city. The shop was known for creating the finest fabrics, woven with patterns that told stories of warriors, love, and the wisdom of ancestors. Mama Lila, the shop's owner, was a strict but fair old woman. Her hands were worn from years of weaving, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. When Nyota asked for work, Mama Lila studied her carefully. You wish to weave? She asked. Yes, Nyota replied, keeping her head low. I am skilled. Mama Lila handed her a bundle of rough fabric. Show me. Nyota took the cloth and, with swift, practiced hands, wove a pattern so intricate that even Mama Lila raised an eyebrow. The old woman nodded approvingly. You are good, she admitted. But talent alone is not enough. Here, you must work hard. And so, Nyota began her new life. An ordinary girl in an ordinary world. For the first time, no one paid her any special attention. The shop workers barely noticed her beyond what was necessary. Some dismissed her because she looked plain, while others judged her only by her work. For the first time in her life, she was treated as ordinary. At first, it unsettled her. She was used to eyes lingering on her, to voices softening when they spoke to her. But here, she was just Nyota, a weaver among many. Yet, there was one person who did notice her, a young tailor named Jabari. Jabari was different from the other men Nyota had known. He did not boast of riches, nor did he try to impress her with sweet words. Instead, he spoke with warmth, treating her with kindness and respect. You work with such patience, he observed one afternoon as they walked side by side. Each stitch tells a story. Nyota glanced at him, surprised. Most people only cared about the finished cloth, not the meaning woven within. You see that? She asked. Jabari smiled. Of course. Weaving is like life, it's the small details that make it strong. Nyota found herself enjoying his company. He never asked about her past or why she covered her face. Instead, he valued her skill, her thoughts, her laughter. And for the first time, Nyota felt seen. The arrogant nobleman. One afternoon, a commotion stirred in the marketplace outside. The workers whispered among themselves as a man dressed in fine robes and gold rings stepped into the shop. His name was Omari, the son of a wealthy nobleman. Omari walked as if the world belonged to him, his chin high, his eyes sweeping over the shop with little interest. He barely glanced at the weavers until his gaze landed on Nyota. He frowned. Who is this girl? Mama Lila responded without looking up. One of my best weavers. Omari scoffed. She looks plain. Nyota said nothing, continuing her work as if he were no different from the countless men who had judged her. But when Omari saw the fabric she had woven, his expression changed. He ran his fingers over the patterns, realizing the quality of her work. This is excellent, he admitted, then smirked. You may be ugly, but you are useful. Perhaps I will take you as a wife. Jabari, who had been listening quietly, stiffened. Nyota, however, simply laughed. She stood, facing Omari with steady eyes. You insult me, then think I would marry you. A man who sees only value in beauty and skill but not in the soul. Omari was taken aback. He was not used to rejection. He glanced around, realizing that others were watching. With a sneer, he waved a dismissive hand. Suit yourself. There are plenty of women who would be grateful for my attention. As Omari stormed out, Nyota turned back to Jabari, who was grinning. That was bold, he said. Nyota shrugged, a playful glint in her eye. I have no use for men who admire only what they can see. Jabari nodded thoughtfully. Neither do I. And at that moment, Nyota knew her journey was only just beginning. The test of love. The weeks passed, and Nyota found herself drawn to Jabari more and more. They spent long hours at Mama Lila's textile shop, working side by side. Between weaving and sewing, they shared stories of childhood, of dreams, of the futures they wished to create. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, Jabari spoke softly. I want to open my own tailor shop one day, he admitted. A place where people aren't judged by their wealth, but by the stories they bring. But, he sighed, shaking his head. I have no means. No land, no money. Only my hands and my skill. Nyota smiled, her fingers threading a piece of cloth. That is enough, Jabari. A dream is like a tapestry, it begins with a single thread. Jabari chuckled. And what of you? What is your dream, Nyota? Nyota hesitated, staring at the fabric in her hands. To live a life where I am seen for who I truly am. They sat in silence after that, the weight of unspoken words resting between them. A royal announcement. The peaceful routine of the city was soon interrupted by a grand announcement. The prince of the land would choose a bride at the festival of the moon. The festival would be the grandest event of the year. A night of music, dance, and celebration. Every noble family, every merchant, and every eligible young woman would attend in hopes of catching the prince's eye. The entire city buzzed with excitement. Mama Lila, ever the perfectionist, gathered her best weavers. We have been chosen to craft the finest fabric for the royal family, she declared. Nyota, you will weave the ceremonial cloth. Nyota's heart pounded. This was an honor beyond imagination. Yet, as the city prepared for the festival, an idea began to take root in her mind. Removing the mask. For months, she had lived as an ordinary girl, unseen, unnoticed. But at the festival, she could attend as herself, without the mask, without the disguise. Would anyone recognize her? Would Jabari see her differently? That evening, she carefully removed the layers of cloth and clay. As she stood before the mirror, Nyota, the village beauty, returned. Her dark skin glowed under the lantern light, her eyes shimmered like the night sky, and her features, once hidden, now held a quiet strength. With her finest self-woven gown draped over her shoulders, she stepped into the festival, ready to face her test. A city in awe. From the moment she arrived, all eyes turned to her. Gasps filled the air. People whispered, pointing at the mysterious beauty who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Omori, the arrogant nobleman who had insulted her before, nearly tripped over himself as he rushed toward her. "I have always admired you," he declared loudly, eager to erase his past mistake. "Surely you remember me?" Nyota smirked. "Oh, yes. The man who found me too plain to be noticed." Omori paled, laughing nervously. I must have been blind. But now, let me." Nyota turned away before he could finish. She had no time for false admirers. The prince's interest. Word spread quickly, and soon, the prince himself took notice. He was a tall, noble man with a regal presence, surrounded by guards and advisors. His dark eyes studied Nyota, intrigued by her elegance and grace. "You are unlike anyone I have seen before," he said, offering his hand. "May I have this dance?" Nyota hesitated. Every girl in the kingdom would dream of this moment. The prince, handsome, powerful, offering a future of wealth and security. But as she glanced across the festival, her gaze met Jabari's. He stood frozen, staring at her as if she were a stranger. Gone was the plain girl he had walked beside for months. Gone was the Nyota he had come to know. She had hidden herself to test the world, but now the test had reached its moment of truth. Would Jabari still see her as the woman he had once admired? Would he see her at all? The truth is revealed. Nyota stood at the heart of the festival, her beauty catching every eye, her presence commanding the attention of nobles and commoners alike. But the only gaze that mattered to her was Jabari's. He stood a few feet away, frozen in shock. His dark eyes, usually filled with warmth, now flickered with confusion and hurt. "Nyota." His voice was barely a whisper, but in it, she heard the weight of his emotions. He took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, looking between the radiant woman before him and the plain, masked girl he had walked beside for months. "You lied to me," he said, his voice tight. Nyota's heart clenched. This was the moment she had feared. "I never lied," she said gently. "I was always me." Jabari let out a humorless laugh. "Were you?" "The Nyota I knew, she was humble, hardworking, kind. She didn't need to hide behind tricks." Tears stung Nyota's eyes, but she held her ground. "I did it because I had to know. I had to know who would love me for my heart, not for my face. And you saw me before anyone else did." Jabari looked away, struggling to understand. "You made a fool of me." Nyota shook her head. "No, Jabari. You proved what I have always hoped, that love is more than skin deep." False admirers. Before Jabari could respond, a loud voice interrupted. "Oh, my beautiful Nyota." Omori pushed through the crowd, his arrogance returned now that he saw how admired she was. He grasped her hand as if it already belonged to him. "Why waste your time on a tailor?" he sneered, flicking a dismissive glance at Jabari. "Come, join me. I can give you silk, gold, and a palace to match your beauty." Before Nyota could pull away, Another voice rang out. I would offer her far more than that. The prince stepped forward, his deep voice carrying authority. His eyes studied Nyota with interest, but something in them made her uneasy, an admiration not for who she was, but for how she looked. A woman as captivating as you belongs by my side, he declared. As my queen. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The prince had spoken. Any other girl would have accepted without hesitation. But Nyota, she saw the truth. Omori's desire was built on greed. The prince's interest was built on image. Neither of them saw her. Choosing freedom. The festival had grown silent, all eyes waiting for Nyota's answer. She took a deep breath, her voice steady. I will not be bought with wealth, she told Omori. And I will not be chosen like a prize, she told the prince. Murmurs erupted in the crowd. Who would refuse a prince? Nyota turned to the people. Since I was a child, I have been told my beauty was my greatest gift. But I have learned that beauty can be a trap, a mask that blinds others from seeing who I really am. She turned to look at Jabari, her eyes pleading for him to understand. A woman's worth is not in her beauty but in her mind, her kindness, and her strength, she said. If a man cannot love her for these things, then his love is not worth having. Silence hung in the air. And then, slowly, one by one, people began to nod. Mothers held their daughters closer. Fathers looked at their wives in a new light. Women who had long been unseen now stood taller. The weight of Nyota's words settled over the crowd, a lesson they would not soon forget. The moment of truth. As the festival continued without her, Nyota stepped away from the prince, away from Omori. She turned to Jabari. I do not ask you to forgive me tonight, she said softly. But if you still see the woman beneath the mask, the woman you once called a friend, then meet me at the textile shop when the sun rises. Jabari hesitated, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But in his eyes, there was something else, a flicker of understanding. Nyota did not wait for his answer. She walked away, leaving behind a prince, a nobleman, and a city that would never look at beauty the same way again. A love that sees the soul. The festival was over. The music had faded, and the city had returned to its usual rhythm. But in Mama Lila's textile shop, a different kind of anticipation hung in the air. Nyota sat at her weaving station, her hands steady, but her heart restless. She had made her choice. She had spoken her truth. Now, she had to face the consequences. She expected Jabari to stay away. Perhaps he would never trust her again. Perhaps she had lost him forever. The thought sent a sharp ache through her chest, but she pushed it away. She had chosen honesty. She had chosen freedom. That had to be enough. A surprising return. The morning sun cast golden rays through the shop's open windows. Nyota focused on her walk, pretending she wasn't listening for the sound of approaching footsteps. Then, they came. Slow, deliberate, familiar. She turned, and there was Jabari. But he wasn't empty-handed. In his arms, he held a bundle of fabrics, wooden tools, and neatly stacked coins. Nyota blinked. What is all this? Jabari set everything down on the table, exhaling deeply before meeting her gaze. My savings. Every coin I've earned, every extra piece of cloth I've collected over the years. She furrowed her brows. Why are you showing me this? He hesitated, then smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. Because I want to open my own tailor shop, he said. And I want you to do it with me. Nyota's breath caught in her throat. I was angry, Jabari admitted. Not because you hid your beauty, but because I felt like I had lost the person I knew. The woman I admired. The woman he stopped himself, shaking his head. But now I see, that woman was never gone. You were always her. Nyota swallowed hard. And you still want to build a life with me? Jabari stepped closer. Not because of how you look, but because of who you are. Tears welled in Nyota's eyes. For years, she had questioned if someone could ever truly see her. And now, here he was. Removing the mask, forever. With trembling hands, Nyota reached for the last piece of cloth that covered her face. She untied it slowly, feeling the weight of her past fall away with it. For the first time in months, she stood completely as herself, not hidden, not disguised, but whole. Jabari simply smiled. You were always beautiful, he said. But this is the beauty I fell for. A future built together. With Mama Lila's blessing, Nyota and Jabari opened their own workshop. It was not just a place for sewing, it was a place for storytelling. Every garment they created told a tale. Cloth woven with patterns of strength, honoring women who had been told they were only as valuable as their beauty. Fabrics embroidered with symbols of resilience, celebrating those who had dared to choose their own path. Their shop became known throughout the city, not just for its craftsmanship, but for its meaning. And soon, word reached the village. The village sees her true success. One afternoon, Nyota's parents and sisters arrived at the shop. Mama Julia and Baba Chidi had once dreamed of a rich marriage for Nyota, but now, as they stood in the doorway of her thriving business, they saw something far greater. Their daughter had built a life of her own. Komara and Nia, once trapped in unhappy marriages, watched in awe. You proved there is another way, Komara whispered. Nia, still bearing the scars of a loveless marriage, stood taller for the first time in years. That night, as they sat together, Nyota spoke softly. You are not trapped. You can build your own life too. Her sisters exchanged a look, one filled with hope. A new dawn. The next morning, before the city had awakened, Nyota stood on the rooftop of the shop, watching the sunrise. Jabari joined her, standing by her side. You once told me your dream, he said. To be seen for who you truly are. Do you think you found it? Nyota exhaled, a slow smile spreading across her face. Yes, she said. I have found love. But more than that, I have found freedom. And as the sun rose over the city, casting light over everything they had built, Nyota knew her story was just beginning. The end.